All right, off we go. Bienvenue. Welcome to another property live stream. This is number 4 out of 5. This is Property Quorum, where we I would say bang heads or disagree or agree with each other, talking about current topics. Specifically, this one today is called the Eviction Meltdown, which I hope we'll have some strong views about. I'm looking to the audience and hopefully somebody can come up with some commentary. But either way, as ever, to start us off, Hamish McClay.
Well, it's morning, so good morning to you all. And it's gone very, very quiet on this particular sort of side of things. The press itself doesn't really want to speak about the subject. Nobody in the government wants to speak about it because it's causing some kind of mayhem. I'm rather surprised we don't have an awful lot of landlords and landlords organisations speaking about this particular subject, because it is causing quite serious challenges. Now, the introduction of the changes in law relative to the letting of properties, many landlords have felt the need, because of the control, to actually sort of leave and sell off their properties. Now, in order to actually do that, they want to actually move away from the situation entirely, because it was costing them more than they were actually making for letting out their properties. So the number of properties on the market to start off with, which aren't helping this sort of situation. But unfortunately, the removal of the tenants, now it's not the fault of the landlords. I mean, it's the fault of the situation that's been created by the government, whereby those landlords really cannot afford to keep paying, because in fact they are paying money out rather than making money because of the tenants they're keeping. So they have to remove the tenants, get the property sort of vacant in order for them to sell. Now, of course, what this is meaning, first of all, it's creating a situation for the tenants, because they've asked the reason behind it is because of the removal of the Section 21, which was a removal from people from their properties without sort of any major reasoning behind it, but it was just a straightforward way of removing tenants. That's been taken away without the court system. It was always argued the court system needed to be improved to be able to sort of speed up the possibility of all of these properties going through. We don't need a special courts or whatever. However, it's causing mayhem. And so it's causing mayhem for the landlords, for the tenants, and for the housing in general, because it's taking all of these properties out of the marketplace whilst all of this is going on as well. And of course, because of this, they don't have the vacant possession, so they're not going to be able to change the situation. So it's a serious element of what's going on, and nobody is speaking about it.
Well, it seems to me that we need to keep abreast of these sort of things, especially as it affects so many. Silas, what is really going on with this eviction chaos?
Well, I'd like to start, Gareth, by giving a bit of an example, if I may. I'll talk about the very first buy-to-let property that I bought. And it was in an area where traditionally you wouldn't take on, or there weren't many what we would call benefit tenant houses or local authority housing allowance tenancies. And so this particular property, we'd done it up, we put a to-let board outside, hand-painted to-let board, and this lady came from literally 2 streets away to rent the property, and she told me her story. She was unfortunately being physically abused by her partner, and she wanted to get into a new home with the kids as soon as possible. So fast-tracked the story. We let the property to her very successfully for about 5 years, until her eldest child hit the age of 18. At that point, she had a reduction in her housing benefit and could no longer afford the rent that we had kept at the same level for that 5-year period. So no annual increases or anything like that. Good tenant, looking after the property, everybody's happy. So the council's answer to that conundrum was rather than pay the increase, which was about, I think, £60 from memory, £60 a month, they said to her, you can't afford to pay the rent, so you'll just have to stop paying it, and then the landlord will be forced to evict you. Okay, now imagine this dynamic. She's in tears. She doesn't want to lose the roof over her head. We've been good friends for 5 years, but it comes down to money in this equation, where we have to then step in, serve notice. She then has to be got to the point of being thrown out of the house before the council will then rehouse her. And in the end, because there was no other property available, they then backtracked and paid the increase in the local housing allowance. And the point of me telling you all that story is the fact this is the reality of what's going on the ground for tenants who have been good tenants through no fault of their own. And now the law is changing to the point where the landlord will have to wait at least 3 months before they can serve the eviction notice or even go to court to gain possession, which could take 6, 9, 12 months in the hope that they get the possession of their property back. All the while, in the background, that mortgage has got to be paid. And this is the thing that everybody overlooks. The landlords aren't sitting on piles of cash and have just chucked it into a property. Invariably, there's a mortgage. If that mortgage doesn't get paid, it falls upon the landlord to subsidize the tenant's housing. And that is the thing that the landlords find most disagreeable is, well, why is it all my responsibility? I've done my bit.
Right.
Why am I now subsidizing somebody else's way of life? And so the landlord exodus is happening. That leads to less properties being available, rents going up, of course. And this is the utopia that this government seems to have created around the housing crisis.
Now, it seems to me, I mean, I hear everything you're saying, but it's the actual Renters' Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
Phase 1 starts on the 1st of May, right?
Correct.
And including, of course, Section 21, which is what the bum fight's all about.
Yep.
Can the system cope?
I from what I can see and from what I'm hearing, it genuinely cannot. So, as I understood it, there were supposed to be provisions put in place for an increased capacity, if you like, in the legal system to cope with the evictions of tenants. And the important point to really understand is, if you're a reasonable landlord, which, to be fair, 90% of the people that I've met in that industry are, you don't ever want to have your property empty. All you want is your rent coming in. And that's why many landlords will not increase rent year on year, because as soon as they get a void, they have to start paying for it, right? And so they want to keep good tenants in the property. The only time you're going to seek possession usually is either when you're forced to sell through death, or divorce, or you've got a bad tenant who's trashing the property, not taking care of it, and you want them out because of social issues or what have you. And at that point, if you know that you've got a 12-month battle ahead of you that's going to cost you thousands in legal fees and thousands of pounds in mortgage fees, you are going to be very cautious about continuing on this path where you've been villainized for the last probably 2 years. And that I think is where we're seeing the exodus. People are trying to get ahead of this thing because they know that the court system can't cope. They know the balance of favour is completely in with the tenant. And so they're kind of out of options.
All right. And what would you say is the right balance between tenant security and landlord enforceability? What trade-off are we actually choosing here?
I mean, I don't want to rest on the laurels of the past, but the Section 21 was a very clever scenario for allowing fast-track recovery of the property. And, right. And everything I've just said still stands, is that you want to have the tenant in the property for as long as possible, because that's the only way the investment, and for a lot of these people, they weren't really investments, they were houses that they'd maybe had in the past and they've decided to rent out. You want that money to continue to come in. So as long as that equation is matched, fine. Where I see the market going now is that your landlord is going to be very choosy about who they're going to let to. So the story that I told you right at the start, people probably wouldn't take that tenant now. Because there's too much risk. You know, what if she doesn't pay? What if housing benefit doesn't come through? Are they going to start paying housing benefit directly to the tenant and then expect the tenant, who might have a money management issue, to then pay me afterwards? And then I've got to wait 12 months to get them out of my property. that's the thing that people are missing, and this is what happens. And I think when you get legislation drafted by people who have never actually been at the sharp end of what's actually going on.
I mean, it sounds to me like you're suggesting there's going to be a shift away from high risk tenants, that goes away from benefits, variable income, large families. How do we stop that from becoming discrimination by another name?
I think that discrimination, unfortunately, is already happening, and that is not something that we can put at the landlord's door. I don't think it's just the framework that they're having to work within. You start removing some of the safety nets. People have got to make a commercial choice. Why should I sit there paying out £6,000, £7,000, £8,000, £10,000 a year on a property that I'm just not getting any income for? You know, none of us would, with respect, probably be subsidising other people's way of life. I don't think it's fair to put that at the landlord's door. What I do see perhaps happening, though, which is something that I'm quite passionate about, is that I think we will see the rise of the corporate landlord. So as the everyday landlord starts to exit the market, you end up with the big corporates coming in who have got the time, money, expertise, legal teams, the relationships with the courts, dare I say, to be able to deal with this in their own way. And I think I think then tenants will be a number, and I think they will find their relationship very much at odds with what they've experienced in the past when they've been dealing with a small landlord. So if that's the future that we all want to live into, happy days. I think it's coming in the next 5 years, but do I think that's what we should be doing? Absolutely not.
Hamish, how does this affect the length of time? I mean, there's always been a pressure on search agents like yourselves and the organisation you represent, IPSA, to bang through searches as quick as possible, when that is obviously fights against quality, and it's always that balance between the two. How does this affect this when there's constantly a movement at the bottom end of renters in and out of property? Surely there's going to be more pressure on you.
Well, ultimately there will be. I mean, at the moment, what we've got is a total sort of impasse, because those properties are currently are sat there, and they're waiting, if you like, they're waiting for something to happen.
They're in
They're not
purgatory.
getting to the courts. They're not getting empty. So in actual fact, it's one of those sort of situations, and to actually make it worse, and Silas will know the specific dates, I believe it was 2024, when at long last, what the council were willing to actually sort of pay to private landlords was actually sort of increased, because it's been stuck for sort of several years. Now, the big problem is that amount, although the costs have gone up for landlords, that amount has not been increased. It wasn't increased in 2025 and isn't being increased this year either. So that is putting landlords in an even worse situation, because they're not getting more money, when in fact the reality is it's costing them more money to maintain the properties. So of course there's that particular pressure which is brought on them. So when people actually sort of look at it, rather like, you know, people like sort of, we speak about the pubs and what a serious situation they're in because of
Absolutely.
the increase in business rates. We have a very similar situation going on with the landlords, with greater expenses for them, bigger taxation issues, which the government again have imposed on these particular sort of people. And I think, as Silas said, the worst situation of all is how we get these things through the courts, because you cannot get the things through the courts. Now, we've got a situation. The landlord does not want to do this, but the landlord has been pressured into this by government, like a number of other people have actually we're losing not so much the brain drain, but the money drain. We're losing a lot of people. And of course, some of these landlords, they're thinking, well, stuff this. I can go over to France and buy a property a darn sight cheaper over there, and I don't even need to rent it out. I can rest on my laurels because of the money I should be able to make, and all they want to do is get it cleared. So there will be a mad rush, and of course it will actually run right the way through the system.
Right.
We are able, as it's because we're independent providers of these searches, we are able to cope with the volume. Unfortunately, the factory conveyancers can't cope with the volume.
Right.
To a certain extent, they still struggle a bit at the moment, even though things are quieter. So the impact isn't actually going to be on us, it's going to be on the system, because we will be effectively able to, if we can keep up with what's going on with some of these authorities becoming unitary authorities, there shouldn't be too much of a challenge. But there's an awful lot of things wedging together to make the property market a very difficult one. And therefore, the intent of this government, which we all thought would have been great had it worked, because it was a big, big thing. That was one of the things which they were mandated to do within this sort of current tendency as running the government. This 1.5 million properties. But unfortunately, situations like this, we've got existing properties that basically aren't being utilised. So we're losing those. And at the same time, we've got that double wedge because we're not building them either. So, and one situation, this might become a topic that we can actually sort of cover. There are a number, because of the cost to constructors now of building developments. When those developments are built, they are meant to be building houses of an affordable nature, which of course could be used for social housing, for example. They are changing the rule. They've said, hey, look, we can no longer afford 37% or 25%. We can only make 15% of these properties affordable. So that getting the marketplace sort of moving is getting more and more difficult, because we do need many more affordable houses as we do social housing.
I thank you both for your sage comment. I want to just ask one question of you, Silas, just before we wrap up for today. I want to talk briefly about the human cost of long enforcement waits. Tenants stuck in limbo, landlords stuck paying mortgages, neighbours stuck with ASB. This can't be good for the property market overall, surely.
It's absolutely not, Gareth. And if you look at the statistics around mental health for consumers, buyers and sellers, for estate agents working in the profession, for conveyancers working in the profession, there's already a mental health crisis unfolding. And the knock-on impact, if anybody's ever gone through legal action, court action, if you're the lay person and you get this letter through your door now saying you're going to be evicted, we're going to bring legal action against you, horror of horrors. I'm trying to raise my family, I'm trying to keep a roof over our head, I'm going to work all the hours God sends, and now I've got to deal with this. And that can take months and months and months. And it's the same for the landlord on the other end, because now you've got extra expenses to pay and all the rest of it. The cost of all of this, what's that phrase? The only winners are the bloody lawyers, right? And that, unfortunately, I think is where we're going to see this detachment of humanity, where people do just become numbers, and it's a real shame. I mean, I probably told the story before on this show where I had a tenant many years ago. They'd moved into the property again. They were with me for 5-6 years, whatever it was. They'd had 3 kids. They got a real baby factory going on in the property. It became too small for them. They wanted to move out. They were hugely apologetic at leaving because they'd had such a good relationship with me. Found a property. They went to move into it, and on the day they went to move in, the property they found had got black mold. He said, I can't leave my kids in there. He was crying on the phone to me. He said, can we move back into the property? I said, look, we've not rented it yet. Feel free, move your stuff back in, get yourself comfortable. He said, I've got a real problem though. I haven't got because I've spent my rent on the deposit for this new place. I haven't got the money for this month's rent. I said, Steve, don't worry about it. Get yourself moved back in. We'll sort it out. No contract, no agreement, none of that. And people could look at me and say, well, you're the fool, Silas, for not having that in place. But to me, it's the human element of, the risk I'm taking is very minimal. This guy's been a good tenant for 5-6 years. His family's there. They know the areas, mum and dad around the corner. And I think he paid like 50 quid a month on top for the next however many months until that balance was paid off. And it was just done. And that's the thing that I think people overlook when you hear these stories about road landlords and everything else. There is a very much a human side, which, as I say, 80 to 90% of landlords that I've ever dealt with are sympathetic in nature. They do want to help out. The last thing they want to do is evict a tenant, and it's heartbreaking. So yeah, there is a big human element, which I think is being massively overlooked in a lot of this.
All right. Well, I'm going to close this up today. I'm going to say thank you so much, Hamish McClay. What a poignant topic. And Silas, please, for your sage words. Very supportive, very helpful. And to watch out, Cladding Matters is tomorrow. We're going to be pushing and pulling at all the topics to do with property safety and everything allied to that. But until then, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please try and look after your mental health. Until next time. Bye-bye.